go for it.
Welcome everyone to the December edition of the Serverless London Meetup. We're doing things a bit differently today to normal. Instead of having talks, we've got a panel of serverless heroes. They're going to recap their highlights of reInvent for you. So first up, Emra, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us what your highlight was?
Hey Alex, thanks a lot for having all of us here, and thanks a lot for giving me an opportunity to be with you today. I'm Emrah Shamdan. I'm the latest serverless hero, and it was quite an honor to be recognized as a hero. And for me, this reInvent in terms of serverless was very exciting because there are like many of enablements provided by the AWS, like the maximum memory increase, like the Docker image support, like or container image support, or like the 1 millisecond billing. These are actually very big enablements, and I'm very excited about what we can do with this. But we will talk in detail.
Thank you very much. Next up, Sheen, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us your highlight?
Yeah, sure. Hey, Alex. Thanks for getting us here. It's nice to be among the friends. My name is Sheen Brussels, and I'm a senior engineer manager working at the Lego Group, and I'm also a AWS serverless hero. And a few of you may know that I've been talking about serverless and writing about serverless and how we migrated the Lego.com onto serverless. And so there are a few highlights this year's reInvent. Of course, the main highlight for me, I know I'm biased, is the Werner's keynote and the representation of Lego.com as part of it. So my colleague Nicole gave the brief of where we started and where we are heading to. So that's one of my highlights. And I had my own talk earlier on the first day and was focusing more on orchestration versus choreography, and specifically focusing on step functions and event bridge. I had quite a number of positive feedbacks, so that's a good thing. And in terms of announcements, there are so many things happen around Lambda, 10 gig or millisecond billing, etc., etc. For me, the Express, the synchronous state machine, the step function, was a big thing for me because it can really benefit many use cases. And then I would say the upcoming Aurora Serverless version 2. Now that opens many opportunities to confidently use Aurora, not to worry about all the the sort of the cold start timings and things like that. And the other one, it's the fault injection simulator for chaos engineering. So this again is expected next year. This is something I'm really interested to look into. And a couple of other things happened with SQS, the batch size increase, and the increased TPS for the FIFO SQS queues. But the first three, to me, were the highlights.
Nice. It was very cool to see your colleague Nicole talking, because I believe about a year ago she actually gave a talk at this meetup. So that was very interesting.
And she did one of the virtual meetup, last one. Yeah.
Yeah, it was very cool. Next up, Ben. Ben actually works with me. He's the VP of Engineering at Theodo and specializes in serverless. Ben, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us your highlight?
Sure. Well, you've already introduced me. So from my side, I mean, the container support, although it's not something I'm necessarily going to use as much, I think for adoption, it's going to be a massive enabler. And that enablement to adoption, as Emra mentioned, is really a theme to this year's reInvent. I think it's also going to have some confusion, and we're going to have to help people in understanding best practices and understanding how it fits into the ecosystem. And outside of serverless specifically, some of the releases in the industrial IoT space, specifically Monitron, which is enabling us to do more interesting things inside of factories and connecting that back to AWS services. That's where I've been spending a lot of time researching and talking to people about how we can start to trial that on their factories. So they're my personal highlights. Thanks, Alex.
Amazing. And then last up, Ant, if you could give a quick intro to yourself and what your highlight was.
Hi, Ant Stanley, also AWS Serverless Hero. I'm co-founder of a business called Homeschool by Senzo. We do online training, amongst other things. I think one of my highlights of the never-ending reInvent, I think there's two areas for me. One is the expansion of what Lambda can do. The AWS Lambda team have been very good at just doing these incremental improvements for 6 years now. And with each improvement, they remove a barrier to adoption. And I think they did really well with container support and with the 6 vCPU, 10 gig of RAM support. Interestingly now, Lambda can have more vCPU than Fargate. Fargate maxes out at 4. Lambda now maxes out at 6. Though Fargate has 30 gigs of RAM, Lambda has 10. That was really interesting. The other really interesting thing I found is kind of a quiet announcement at the end of reInvent is Lambda now has support for Kafka. Native, you running your own Kafka, you can basically now Kafka can be an event broker for you. So it's really interesting that they now have this open source support, and I think it's a good sign of what's to come. It looks like they're going to try out to see like what the demand is, but it would be really interesting to see what other queuing systems they'll start to add support to as native event sources within Lambda. But that was super interesting, and that's available today. Yeah, that's kind of my thoughts.
Amazing. If you all want to turn your cameras on now, we'll go to more of the panel view. But both Ben and Ant, you talked about some extensions to Lambda. That goes well into our first question that we've got for tonight. So container support is likely an announcement that people had mixed feelings about. Do you think this is going to be a good thing for adoption? Where do you think this is going to lead to in the future?
I'll dive into that. I think it's going to be great for adoption. I think for folks who already have existing tool chains with containers, it'll be great. And also I think for the folks who struggled really hard to fit everything they need into a zip file for Lambda, it also opened up a few more use cases, particularly in the machine learning space. So yeah, it's one of those things that's going to hopefully drive adoption into a whole new market, hopefully.
That's my only, and I agree it's going to help adoption in a new market. I think people might have more confusion with services like Fargate and might try and lift and shift their existing applications into Lambda and are going to hit a lot of pain points with that. So I think we need to make sure people understand what the service is for and how this enables them. But I think it doesn't get rid of all the sort of mindset changes that are needed to work in a stateless way, to work in an event-driven way. So I think there's still those sort of conceptual barriers to entry that we need to help people with. But yeah, I do fear people are going to try and lift and shift, and I don't think it's going to end too successfully.
Sheen, is this technology you could see being used at Lego, or does it not fit your use case?
At least not at the moment as part of my side of the Lego group, but I can see the use cases. I mean, I understand the reason why they opted this one, but my fear is that Ben was alluding to whether it would kind of make this monolithic mindset again or not, because with sort of sleek and simple Lambda functions, you had this sort of single purpose and do it and gone, whereas now you have the power to bring the whole thing onto and run a serverless. So that's the other thing. But I fully understand the different use cases that this will bring into this serverless spectrum. Yeah.
And Ben, the confusion you touched upon with Fargate versus Lambdas with containers, what do you think the different use cases are? Like what should people keep in mind?
Yeah, I mean, my answer is that when we're thinking event-driven, we more think of Lambda, but I saw Ant getting into a very deep debate on a Slack channel the other day. So maybe Ant has a more comprehensive answer for us.
Yeah, I think trying to define the difference between Fargate and Lambda can be a bit hard, because Fargate does have some event-driven capabilities. You can fire off a Fargate task via CloudWatch logs, which is not EventBridge. EventBridge has grown out of CloudWatch logs, but they still both exist. And Fargate interacts with CloudWatch logs, CloudWatch log events, not EventBridge. That's a clear distinction. I think the big thing is, so Lambda is significantly more event-driven. Fargate, for me, you adopt it when you hit a barrier of Lambda. So if it's stateless versus stateful is the two big things. So if you have a stateful workload, so you can run small databases, you can run things like Redis and Memcache and things like that within Fargate if you need to. So if something's stateful or long running, Fargate's a great choice for those kind of things. If you need your job to handle, if you want to handle more than multiple, like one request per environment, Fargate does that. There's a couple of areas, but Fargate scales slower. It doesn't have the myriad of event sources. It's not great for stateless workloads. So, web servers, that kind of thing. If you've got a lot of stateless processing, it's not a great use case. And if it's really short-lived invocations, it's also, you can do it, but it's not a great use case. So, typically I look as a workload stateful or stateless, event-driven or not event-driven. And then the other side of it, Fargate takes a lot more configuration. You've got to set up VPCs. You've got to either set up, you can use API gateway, HTTP API gateway with a little bit of work, or you go use ALBs, these kind of things. So it does require more work to set up Fargate. But, so serverless first, does Lambda fit my use case? If it doesn't, go Fargate. A couple of areas why you want to choose one or the other.
I'm tempted to ask Emra, from the observability point of view, do you see any challenges with this one, Emra?
Like very sadly, I lost the last part of your sentence.
Oh, no, do you see any observability issues with this container support in terms of visibility?
So it is an issue for like the existing observability companies, maybe like us, because when you like all of or like Tundra's offering was about like we have this very lightweight agent which is supposed to be working with in the Lambda functions, and it has like different condition of like attaching, just wrapping, and so on. But like when you bring the container support, you can use the more traditional agents. I don't want to name a company, but and in this way you can use their agents as well, just to gain observability through Lambda functions if they're running on a container image. Yeah, we are supporting for these container image observability from day one, but this also enables people who's using, let's say, I will name Datadog in other parts of the system, and they can use Datadog observability with Lambda, with observability with instrumentation in this way. So this actually unlocks another opportunity for people concerned about observability with, let's say, Tundra or like any other competitors, and they can use that type of agents like more easily.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Nice. There were a few other Lambda announcements throughout reInvent. One you touched on already, was the CPU, vCPU, and RAM increases. Are there many more use cases you think that will enable people to do?
I think machine learning is probably the really big one. There was another slight pre-reInvent announcement where they also announced support for an extended instruction set on Intel CPUs, which basically gives you better performance with any kind of mathematical functions. So for machine learning, you got this double whammy where now you can get access to 10 gigs of RAM plus six vCPUs, which was 2 was your maximum before, and 3 gigs of RAM. Plus those vCPUs can do more themselves. So you're going to have potentially more than 3 times the amount of compute as a minimum for your machine learning workflows, or any kind of workflow where you're doing kind of mathematical kind of calculations, or maybe even data transformation type stuff. So all the Python devs probably had a very good day, because now it's opened up the use case for kind of big data use cases. So I think that's a really big one, which will be really interesting to see how that goes.
Yeah, it definitely will be. Have any of you tried using any of the new increases yet?
And you've been playing around with some fuzzy
stuff.
Yeah,
I've got a project that should hopefully go. I'll hopefully open source it this week. Yeah, one of the big challenges. So if you're a Node.js dev, and I think like 45% of Lambda functions are Node. Node itself is kind of inherently single-threaded, and particularly if you want to do any kind of computational work, that's all happens in the main thread. IO work not necessarily. So I've been experimenting with the workers in Node.js with Lambda. It's something that is available for using Node 12. You can use workers. It's interesting. I think the current results look promising. don't want to talk too much about it because it's not a finished project. But yeah, if you're a node dev, now you've got 6 vCPU, you can use workers. I've got a little MapReduce example where I need to do some work, filter large data sets, I chunk it up. Each worker looks at a chunk of that data set and then returns back the answers, and then have a reduce function that basically collates all of that and sorts it and then returns it back. And that's super interesting because it's a way to get to actually maximize usage out of that function, you know, and be able to do a lot more. It opens up some use cases, which is good. But I wouldn't say I'm the default. I'm not the person who's going to get the most out of it.
I think it's also good as we start to use sort of more machine learning, big data approaches on things like Lambda, which is stateless. And we're starting to think less about the machine they're running on, maybe machineless learning, whatever buzzword we can create. But I think that really prepares us as we start to push these technologies to the edge. So with things like 5G, I think, you know, maybe not next year, but the year after, we're going to see a lot more machine learning on the edge. And I think Lambda is the natural stepping stone. We've seen Lambda edge for doing some things. I guess if we see anywhere near this sort of memory or CPU or vCPU resources available to the edge Lambda functions, I think there's going to be some really interesting applications. Obviously, maybe not this year, but going into 2022, I think that could be really exciting.
So probably to finish up our chat about Lambda functions, unless you guys have any other points you would like to discuss. Twitter has been had a lot of talk about the millisecond billing. Is that a big announcement for you guys, or it doesn't really change much?
Can I take this one? Because, you know,
definitely,
I'm kind of spying our benchmark in Tundra. So, you know, like we are measuring the billable duration for every invocation for every Lambda function at Tundra, and we have this kind of an billable duration benchmark with anonymized data for our customers. And I can say that, like, in my 2 weeks of observation, I'm checking it from time to time, and I can say that the billable duration of the average of people using Tundra is reduced like between 25 to 30%, and, you know, like, people are saving 30% of their money already. So it can go even like into, you know, more margin, but it is for sure, like, in terms of Lambda cost, it brings like lots of savings here.
Yeah, no, that sounds very cool. No, that's very exciting. Is there anything else about Lambda functions that any of you would like to discuss?
I think that, oh, sorry, Sheen, okay.
I'm sorry, just to add to that, you know, the Lambda millisecond pricing, I think it's a great announcement, and it also, you know, reduces like, you know, the typical 10 millisecond boundary and things like that. It's really good. But thing is, people who develop serverless should remember that if you look at the overall, you know, the cost of serverless, Lambda is very, very, you know, tiny. And, you know, most likely that your CloudWatch metrics and Dynamo DBs and those sort of things, heavyweights, you know, adding up the cost. But nevertheless, you know, it really, you know, makes a great saving, especially when you have these sort of, you know, simple functions that only take a few milliseconds to, you know, execute. So
the cost goes from 10 to 8 or like 7. It doesn't seem to be a big deal if you are not, you know, let's say Expedia or, you know, Coca-Cola using Lambda in a very, very big scale. But as you say, like, Lambda has never been the biggest cost item, but it is still cool to see that, like, another objection point is actually removed from the Lambda adoption.
And it's another driver to write performant code, which does obviously make the user experience better for some applications. So I guess there's though it's not a huge amount of money, it's good that we're more tied to the metric, because then hopefully we can, we'll spend more time building fun algorithms that are more efficient, but also maybe make the user experience a bit faster.
Yeah, I think on that, in terms of writing performant code, I think if you've got a bunch of functions that are performing well enough, I think definitely don't go back and refactor them, because the amount of time you will spend refactoring that will most likely outweigh your savings. You know, as Sheen mentioned, it's great to have 30-40% savings on Lambda, but Lambda is a tiny percentage of your overall bill. You know, Dynamo and everything else ends up being a far higher amount. You know, so, you know, to optimize 10% of your bill, 5% of your bill is not necessarily, unless you are very large, it's not necessarily a great thing. But yeah, from a new functions, yeah, put performance in as a requirement up front.
Yeah, I guess there is always the risk that people will try and optimize now that they can get it down and not focus on the total cost of developing.
Yeah.
Cool. Our next topic, unless anyone does have anything else about Lambda functions they want to discuss, is Aurora Serverless V2. There's been a lot of chat about this. I personally haven't used Aurora Serverless V1, so I don't know what to compare it against, but did any of you give it a try?
No, I haven't given a try yet, but I've been following one or two updates, and Jeremy Daly, he ran some sort of experimentation on V2, and really, looking good. From a practical point of view, I know a couple of instances. I had a look at Aurora Serverless for use cases where you need to sort of have bulk queries and things like that. So where it kind of didn't convince me with its sort of slow startup and the shutting down and et cetera, et cetera. So obviously ended up using DynamoDB. But now with the V2, I see the benefits and really motivates to next time when we have a use case, it really becomes a content to look into in order to put in place. So I'm really looking forward to that coming out GA, but I'm also closely watching all the experimentations and updates happening from the industry experts as well.
And
sorry, you go, Ben.
No, I was just going to say this. In terms of barriers to adoption, DynamoDB is a lot to learn, especially if you've been building with relational development for a long time. And it's a very difficult database to master. So I think coming into serverless and knowing that you can use something familiar like a relational database and Aurora in that way, I think that will really help adoption. Whether, if you could do Dynamo and you know how to do Dynamo, I'd say probably still do Dynamo. It will be cheaper, it will scale better. At the same time, a lot of people don't know Dynamo and don't necessarily have the time to learn a new database technology.
Are there any cases where you would pick Aurora Serverless V2 over Dynamo, Ben, now that you do know Dynamo?
Yeah, I think if it's more of an analytics platform where we don't know our access patterns. If you don't know your access patterns, don't try and do Dynamo, and don't try and recreate relational patterns in Dynamo like I might have done a few times. Really, SQL works very well for those use cases. Obviously, for those where we know our access patterns, think about e-commerce, Lego.com, for example. DynamoDB, you can probably know your access patterns in advance. And it's quite interesting. There was also the release of, I think they're called elastic views from Glue, so we can have the same data in multiple places. So one DynamoDB table to another, or one DynamoDB table to Elasticsearch or a relational database. That allows us to have the right database for the right use case, and also probably do some cool event sourcing architectures. But if I'm using DynamoDB, I can't do full text search. So if I can use DynamoDB, but have that data replicated automatically in Elasticsearch without writing all the Lambda functions between them, that's a huge win. We could do the same with going into a relational database to maybe let our data scientists who are already trained in SQL and have been doing it for the last 20 years be able to make use of the data as well. I saw Ant's eyes light up at Elastic Views, so I'm wondering what he's used it for.
Yeah, Elastic Views will be good and for event sourcing architectures. I think some of your more advanced architecture patterns, a lot of people shy away from them because they're not always that simple to set up, and you end up building what looks like a Rube Goldberg machine, which can end up being quite hard to maintain. So you just stick to what you know. So Elastic Views basically takes away a bunch of Lambda functions that would have been writing data somewhere else using off DynamoDB streams, and it just becomes a configuration, which is absolutely awesome. I think the other thing that got announced just before reInvent was Particle, which is a new query language for Dynamo. And I think that's split a lot of opinion as well, because Dynamo can be hard to learn. Learning all your statements and all of that can be difficult. And Particle is a more SQL-like language, kind of easier queries language. I know a lot of folks have said, "Oh, it'll be good for new users, but it's going to lead to a lot of bad practice." Full table scans and that kind of stuff. I'm just wondering what the rest of the panel thinks about something like this.
No, I think I echo this elsewhere as well. Particle is great. I had a quick look at their docs, and it was the documentation is very clear, what you can, what you can't, and recommendations, best practices, etc. But as you say, the mentality can slowly change and get polluted, when you have a sort of SQL-like tool for you to play with. Combining this with what Ben was saying earlier, with the choice of serverless Aurora, that's very important point, because I had a discussion last week where we have a new use case where we need to ingest a new type of clickstream event, and we need to hold on until our big data team is ready in the next 2-3 months time. So that particular use case, we don't know the access patterns. So DynamoDB, it's a really difficult one to fit in. So that's why we're thinking of using, the Aurora Serverless, because that then allows us all the, the batch queries and select count and, all sorts of things. So that's very important, that, if you don't know, your access patterns, you can't, put your indexing and things properly in Dynamo, then it's probably not the, the best thing. So with the particle on top, people may get this sort of a false, impression to run it in large scale, tables, which can be, devastating. So that's the downside.
And I guess on top of that, Alex, I know you're building a clickstream analytics service at the moment with DynamoDB streams into S3 and then Athena. I guess we've got a lot of different ways to do SQL on things that aren't SQL, are not SQL. And I think just the learning different services and if they're SQL or not and how they interrelate to each other and how we can back up data between them, there's that learning cost to having so many different ways to access the data. So I think we do need to be careful that we don't bombard people with all the different ways of doing it when there are some best practice ways to build serverless first. That may be the way to start, and then maybe start to use these different patterns as we go.
Yeah, definitely. I remember when I was first learning to program with Python, that having like the one right way to do things is very helpful. You get too many options, it's easy to fall into those traps. Are there any other Dynamo or data or Aurora topics that people like to discuss before we move on to other areas?
Been done.
Nice. Well, this will be fun then. I was listening to the podcast you did with Ben last week, and you were talking about Proton. I know you've been asked about Proton quite a lot recently, so I think you'll have a well-prepared response. But it was very heavily implied in that podcast that Proton wasn't production ready, and you gave some very good reasons why. Would you like to just tell us a bit about Proton?
Yeah, so I think one thing I've learned is maybe don't be too vocal about a product on Twitter, because I end up just speaking about Proton all the time now. So Proton is interesting. It got announced in Andy Jassy's keynote as a way to deploy Lambda and Fargate. So for a lot of folks are going, oh wow, it's one unified tool, because a lot of folks who use both platforms, they use Fargate and they use Lambda. And it's like, oh wow, one unified tool from AWS can do that, and that missold it slightly, because what Proton is kind of intended for a platform team is intended, for those organizations, a cloud center of excellence, to define policy templates, so environment templates and serverless templates that can then be used by the organization to deploy services. But there's a couple issues with the way it does that. First of all, the user experience is not fantastic. It's not fantastic by AWS standards, never mind by normal human standards, which makes it a little bit confusing. And to actually create these templates, and that's a lot of cloud formation. And NASA can actually support things like Terraform, and they're bringing what's going to be supporting Terraform and other infrastructure as code tooling. They're going to later on add the ability to bring your own IAC in. But so despite the user experience bit, there's two elements which kind of get to me about it. One is, Amazon and a lot of folks are saying, like, you want your teams to work, independently of each other. Your teams need to be able to make changes quickly. They need to be able to own their services. And this is very much an Amazon mantra. It's a mantra of a number of companies, so you have these autonomous, self-governing teams. What Proton does is you create these service templates, and they're in control, and they're controlled by a central team. So what happens if your product team needs to then change one of those service templates? You're potentially in this world where they're reliant on a central team. So that's a potential bottleneck, which I think kind of goes against that mantra of having your self-organized autonomous teams. the other bit with Proton, it doesn't support multi-account. So each team is going to have a set of accounts. You know, they'll potentially have production accounts. Some organizations go to the point where every developer has an account, but you know, typically if a product team will have, you know, 2 or 3 accounts as a minimum, you know, production, staging, and a few others as a bare minimum. And Proton doesn't support multi-account. So you've got the central team that needs to controls your environment templates and your service templates. Are they now going to have to maintain instances of Proton in every single team account? It's a bit, so I think the execution is not fantastic, but there's 2 things. It is preview. I know to what Sheen said earlier about, yeah, we'll look at Aurora Serverless V2 when it's GA. And I think that's a version 2 of a already mature product. Proton is very immature, it's very early. So it's all about, for them right now, it's about getting user feedback. I would be very hesitant to go into production with it because of, you know, no multi-account support and the way it can create that central dependency on your cloud center of excellence team. There's lots of organizations that have this where you work with templates. Sheen can probably give a few really good examples of that. But like the detail on how you implement that is really important. You know, are you going to be blocking your product teams? Or are you, you know, maybe it should be an audit after the fact saying you're compliant or it's not compliant and give that team time to fix it rather than saying no up front, that kind of thing. I know, Sheen, what are your thoughts about that debate?
No, I mean, I agree what you're saying, but if you look at our part of Lego.com, we have, you know, we have this sort of number of multiple squads set up, and there is one squad that looks after all the tooling and setting up all the standards and the pipelines and things for rest of the squad to emulate. So in that, you know, setup, I can see this working. Say, for example, you know, Nicole, she has the squad that, you know, puts in all the best practices and makes sure that everything is in order, you know, with the other squads also having the autonomy in terms of doing the deployments and things like that. So in this sort of setup, I can see it can bring benefits. But on a wider, bigger picture, as you mentioned, there are, you know, there can be issues. So let's see when it matures and comes out. I think at the moment I haven't looked into the details because it's not there yet to, you know, to be seriously considering.
Yeah, I think that's the question. Like, how early do you actually invest time to look at this thing? And I think, yeah, it's maybe at this stage, you attend sessions like this, you read reviews, you make a decision what you're going to invest the time to actually potentially use, or maybe say, okay, I'll look at it again in 6 months, I'll look at it again in 9 months when it's more mature. It's one of those.
Nice. Just before we move on to the next topic, I want to apologize for anyone who came to see Farah. Unfortunately, something came up at the last minute, but we'll be sure to have her on a podcast soon in the future. Emrah, I'd be quite interested to hear if any announcements from reInvent you think will help with observability.
For me, which was kind of, again, bittersweet, was the AWS Distro for Open Telemetry. So if you ever like a chance of like looking at it, AWS has created its own distro for Open Telemetry, and they are using their own, you know, bundle for Java applications. And in the demonstration video, it shows that like you are just adding this jar to your Java project, either it is serverless or not, and it automatically, like some people call it automagically, instruments your application and starts to push everything to X-ray. So like this is kind of quite an improvement by, like, if you think about like what we were doing to instrument applications using the X-rays libraries. This is a kind of a very, very big improvement in terms of observability on AWS natively. And I believe that they will continue to, you know, separate more time on other runtimes as well. And this will bring the AWS customers like much more flexibility to have this automated instrumentation, but just by using like compliant with OpenTelemetry. This is very, very interesting for me.
I think JavaScript got added today. I'm sure I saw a tweet about JavaScript being added today.
Oh, I wasn't aware of it. Like today was hectic for me. I couldn't see it.
I can't find it on the blog, but I'm sure I saw something about JavaScript being added. I'll double check, but I might be wrong. But yeah, that's an interesting one.
And for me, like the second thing was Sheen already mentioned is the fault injection. I kind of became famous with this like chaos engineering on serverless demonstrations, and AWS is also like playing on me with this like the native chaos injection support. Nothing like there's not much detail about it yet because it will be released next year, but it seems like AWS is now preparing like putting enough importance to chaos engineering and supporting it natively. I think it's going to be very, very interesting.
I was going to ask you anyway, Imra, on the same, because, Tantra, you have the support for injecting chaos and, some level of support there, right? So I was going to ask, how do you see this one? I sense this can be a, cool one when we get the product out, but do you see overlaps or do you see enhancing what you offer?
So like what we are offering was kind of an, a side, side product for us, like the chaos. You can inject chaos to your applications and you can see them at the same pane. So like for us, it is an overlapping, of course, but I don't know how exactly AWS will do this, and there's not much detail about it as far as I saw. And like what we are doing in terms of chaos engineering is we are actually taking advantage of our position while we are there to measure what's happening there. We could also inject some failures or latency there, and we were doing this, and we will continue doing this. But it's and what our advantage was about, like you are injecting the chaos and seeing the results at the same platform. And I think AWS is also trying to play this game. You're injecting the chaos and you have now your own like a more mature observability and seeing the results there. So like that will be an overlap, but I don't know how it will be in serverless, of course. Like maybe it's just about the taking down the machines and so on. And I don't know how much serverless will it include in terms of fault injection. We will see. But Adrian is included, so this means that like there will be enough level of serverless there.
Yeah. I know we are moving away from OpenTelemetry, but just wanted to make this point that the reason why it interests me is because I've been through a few meetups and probably one or two chaos specific conferences and things. All I used to hear chaos monkey and Netflix and etc. But when it comes to sort of the average team, wanting to do some sort of chaos experiment, there isn't anything that gives that sort of confidence or the support to do that. I think I see this providing that. That's the reason why it kind of interests me now, because the teams can use something that they can easily put in place. And again, early days, I'm hoping that more details will come through. And as you say, Adrian there, and Gunnar is now part of AWS. So yeah, it can can only get better.
Just to add to that, I'd say don't try and do chaos engineering until you've got good observability. I think people find it an interesting topic, but good observability is difficult. I'm sure Emre can talk about how to make it easier. But you need to know what's going on before you start to break things.
Exactly.
And the other interesting thing for me is if we can make the blast radius of any chaos we inject sort of stack specific. At the moment, I try to avoid mocking integration tests as much as possible because we've got the real services, we should use them. They're ephemeral, we can spin them up. The time I do mock is I need to mock S3 being down or this service being down if I really want to test how our application is going to behave in that scenario. I don't particularly like that mocking that I'm having to do. So if we could inject chaos to specific stack resources through an API at a very low latency, then we can start to have our integration test suites running simulations of different services being down. Of course, we don't want them to be down, but if I'm building a multi-region architecture, I need to test what it looks like when things start to break. So that would be the extension to it from my perspective.
Yeah. I think I remember reading the docs that there will be support to integrate as part of the CI/CD pipeline as well. So that will be something really cool.
So like this is kind of making chaos experiments as a part of your life. So it's like chaos experiments turns out to be, tests to be run in CI/CD. So yeah,
as
this
part
is where
of
it
the
goes,
pipeline.
actually.
Yeah.
I mean, Alex
Testing in
works,
production.
Alex works with me, so he knows a lot of my PRs had chaos at the minute, but it's less intentional.
Yeah. Sidetrack this slightly. You were talking about CI/CD, and obviously we're going to be introducing chaos engineering into it. With the SolarWinds hack, that's going to be, I'm wondering how that's going to impact a lot of people's CI/CD pipelines, seeing a lot more security. And chaos engineering and fuzzing is a really big part around security as well. A lot more security around the CI/CD pipeline. Do you think, I don't know if anyone has seen an immediate short-term impact on like the way they have to build things? Has anyone seen commandments come down from up high saying, are we safe? What are we doing to mitigate this? Are any of you looking at potentially changing the way you implement your CI/CD pipelines to add more kind of security, kind of relative testing, dependency testing or whatever else?
I think we're seen as an industry, people getting more ahead on these things. Even like the last 2 years, I think it's no longer people have issues and then they go and add stuff to their CI pipeline. It's, dependencies are already sort of a standard part of CI pipelines. Checking things like are resources private or public are becoming standard parts of CI/CD pipelines. But no, I've not seen anything so immediate from this, but I guess it's still early days for some people.
Yeah. Is anyone using the new code signing for Lambda, or anyone intending to use that?
A few of large enterprise clients are quite interested by it because that's a clear audit step that they want to meet, and it obviously adds some security. I'm not seeing it in smaller companies taking that much notice of it yet, but I think it could become almost a default as time goes on.
Yeah. So yeah, there's quite a few these little pre-invent announcements like code signing and the extended instruction support, and extensions themselves was 2 weeks before. Yeah, it's hard to keep up with it all.
And Emra, Thunder supports extensions, right?
Yeah, so our extension support is about, asynchronous monitoring. We were already having this, like we were giving another subscriber Lambda to CloudWatch logs of our customers, and it was asynchronous to take the logs out of it, and we were not adding any kind of overhead to the application, and we just like make this support to Lambda extension with this, and in this way, like the Lambda extension takes the logs, takes the data that we produce out of Lambda invocation and send back to our collector. And so our customers now can use our asynchronous monitoring without, subscribing with another Lambda function. So but there are like many things that you can do with the extension. So for example, for security vendors, you can do like when the hook comes, you can, inject some security blockers, and you can just take them out when the container is about to close. And it is actually very, very important in terms of like what you can do and what like all the observability or security vendors can do with serverless.
One thing I've not done, but I was interested by, one of the sort of standard Lambda security things we tend to implement is when we're writing things to the temp directory. Obviously, that can be lived between invocations of a warm Lambda function. So we have a small wrapper that cleans up after us. I wonder if there's a Lambda extension use case there. We can just automatically clear out the temp directory. I need to play around with the API.
Not the one that I don't know I know for now, but there should be. Like, I don't know if PureSec or Protego was alive in these days, like a kind of a startup. I could have seen already an improvement about this maybe. They are not dead already, but they're in the part of a big company.
A similar question to what I had for Emra, but Sheen and Ant, I'd be curious to hear what announcements you're most likely to implement first on your projects. So like Elastic Views is something in the new year I think will get added to my current project quite quickly. Is there anything that jumped out of you as I'm going to use that's going to be added very soon?
No. For me, a couple of things that probably will try because we're already discussing use cases. One is the synchronous state machine, the step function, express one. That I can see that benefiting, especially in cases. So say the one example I talked about recently is when you do payments. So if you front with a single API to do payments, and behind the scenes you have different types of payments, credit cards, PayPal, Klarna, so and so. What happens now is that you know probably will have a sort of if then else etc. and everything put together in a monolithic serverless service where these sort of things will this will allow you to separate out into smaller services and then use that to orchestrate, because the important thing is these APIs front the customer, so that means you need to be quick to perform. The other thing again probably will refactor a particular area is the one I talked about, the SQS increased batch size. Because previously it used to be a batch of 10 and the long polling I think 20 seconds or 10 seconds, something like this. Now you have up to 5 minutes and 10,000 messages. I'm not saying go all the way to 10,000, but at least gives that sort of flexibility to grab say 100 or 500 messages where applicable, then deal with those things. So these are a couple of things that probably you'll put in place when there is a use cases, when we start refactoring certain parts of the architecture.
Yeah, I think for me, the thing I'm already using today, one of these other little announcements was that the new JavaScript SDK for AWS went GA, and that was just announced via a tweet, and I think there might have been a blog post, but it's actually it's quite a big one for the JavaScript community. So in general, JavaScript has been a relatively fast-moving language in terms of adding features and functionality to it. And the previous AWS SDK was relatively old, was built for like the previous paradigm of JavaScript. So the new one is written in TypeScript. It supports ES modules, also supports CommonJS modules as well. And it's got ships type definitions. So if you are using TypeScript, it's really easy to use. It's also a lot more modular. So it's now thousands of small packages, and the whole idea is you just bring in exactly what you need. And then on top of that, if you are using a bundler, I always use bundlers with my Lambda functions. It's a lot more bundleable. So obviously the AWS SDK is available as standard in your Lambda function. And I think it's still version 2, that's a standard one, not version 3. So it's always there, just available as standard. But even if it doesn't have a major impact on startup time, the node resolution algorithm having to go through and resolve the parts for all these hundreds of thousands of tiny small functions will add some overhead to it, and it will always have some level of impact on cold start. Plus, there's other argument is that AWS will always just upgrade that version that's in the Lambda function as you go, whereas now if you can ship a really small subset of that SDK, which is pinned to the versions you are using, so you don't have another provider just upgrading it without letting you know. You can guarantee the version. So it is really interesting. It bundles well. I haven't seen the unbundle performance, but it looks like it will be more performant than the existing SDK because it's using more modern techniques. And like I said, ES modules, CommonJS, TypeScript. Yeah, I quite like it. Yeah, there are some minor changes. You will have to make changes if you want to swap it out. You can't. It is a breaking change, but I'm using it already today. For example, I'm running GraphQL within a Lambda function. I bundle GraphQL.js. So I'm not using Apollo, I'm just using native GraphQL.js, SNS, SSM, S3, and Dynamo DB in my GraphQL monolith function, and all bundled at 700 kilobytes. It's under a megabyte. It's something I can put into Lambda at Edge if I want to. So that kind of, now you can ship an entire function with all its dependencies together, and potentially run it in other places quite easily, which is great. I think it's a big announcement for a small subset of the AWS developer community.
Sorry, Alex, you're on mute.
It's probably the most common saying this year, right? Yeah, it seems like it's always the more niche announcements that people actually get value out of. I heard from Ben that over reInvent, you guys all got VR headsets and went somewhere called Neon City. What was that like?
Can I take this one? Because Emma might not have.
Go, Emma.
Maybe people didn't notice, maybe they did. I have a very big head. So, and I'm also wearing a kind of a very big glasses. And these glasses are also like things. And in order to wear the VR, I had to, you know, spend some energy. And I managed to do this once. I just hang out in the Neon City first. But at that time, wife was helping me to put on. And after that, I just completely gave up dealing with this. And I kind of, you know, I think wife will be using it from now on, because this is like, that thing is not for big heads. So very unfortunate for me.
I was not expecting that as your answer, Emre.
Like the glasses are the second problem. Like even the head would sit, and I'm kind of very you know, myopic in terms of this, and my glasses are going like to this place. And what I was doing is putting the glasses in the VR first, and then wearing it both, because when I had the glasses on, I couldn't fit it. One glass was going this.
Wasn't there a frame or something to cover that?
Yeah. With that, like even with that.
Okay. The spacer worked for me, but the actual virtual place was quite cool. So there was a town center, and there was a bar, which sadly virtual drinking isn't so fun, and a meeting room, and bowling and golf. There were quite a few different things, but it was quite interesting to see people watching the talks on a screen in virtual reality and talking about them. So yeah, it was quite cool. There was definitely a few glitches where people weren't muted, but other than that, it worked quite well. And I think you were there for some of the sessions, right?
Yeah, I had the first world problem of having dogs at my feet. So, you know, when you're in there and you set it up, and you have to kind of set a boundary, you know, on the floor, so you don't kind of hurt yourself or don't walk into things. And so, you know, so you set that all up, which is fine. But then I have moving objects in the shape of my two dogs walking around. So it became a little bit of a hazard. So I was a little bit limited in how much I could use it. You know, when you've got a 25 kg dog jumping on you trying to say hi, and you VR, it's not always the best. And yeah, they try and trip me up, and yeah, it was it's a great idea, but yeah, I think you definitely need the space and surrounds to do it properly as well.
There's a couple more days of reInvent in the new year, isn't there? In early Jan or mid Jan. Is Neon City open up again for those days?
No, I think
Dynamo, yeah.
Yeah, I think it'll be gone. I think tonight it's going to disappear. So from tomorrow you can use it for, you know, anything else you want to.
Started deprecating worlds. It's dystopian.
And speaking of those couple of days next year, is there anything interesting to look forward to there? I've not looked at too much what those days actually are.
I haven't, to be honest. I need to, because I'm still catching up from my backlog the last 3 weeks. It's not a couple of days. I think more than that.
Yeah,
I think it's like the 13th to the 12th to the 14th of Jan.
Yeah, 3 days.
Oh, okay.
But I'm excited. There's so many sessions I've missed that I'm rewatching right now that my backlog is quite big. So I'm gonna have to use some of this holiday time to get to it.
Yeah. Does anyone have any recommendations on must-watch sessions that they watched or maybe missed and want to go back to?
Definitely Sheen's talk was extremely good, and I've been recommended to a few people.
Thank you, man. I watched.
Sheen, what are your recommendations?
No, I watched the DynamoDB sessions, and the two, there are 4 sessions, part 1, part 2 by Alex as well as by Rick. Alex kind of, the sort of foundation. So if you don't know single table design and things like that, then Rick's was, really as usual, the sort of, high profile patterns and use cases, which was really interesting. Quite a lot of, stats and demos, and was really useful. There were quite a few, I forgot. There was a session from the Scotland Land Registry, which I found really interesting, because there are a number of use cases, how they use the serverless with S3 and with all the security and the access protection and so many other things. I even, tweeted, I wish, that the teams come out and share in serverless events, because I think there's so much content I saw in the presentation.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things a lot of people don't realize is actually the largest serverless conference in the world is reInvent. It's not a dedicated serverless conference, but it's the conference with the most serverless content. Way bigger than serverless conf or serverless days. There's so much content, and a lot of it's in depth. So for serverless stuff, there's a ton, and it's not all on the serverless track as well. The finance track had like half of that stuff was all serverless related. And there's a bunch of other things, like you'll see, like if you see with data lake, invariably there's Lambda in there. It's a serverless thing, because it's really hard to maintain a really large data lake without some level of serverlessness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I specifically like these sort of real use cases, serverless use cases. It's always interesting, and always there's something that you can learn, something new for you. So those sort of really interesting ones. There was another one by AXA, I think, the insurance company, which was good as well. And yesterday I was going through Disney and how they use DynamoDB for their purpose, which was interesting.
Did anyone catch any of the Amazon Builders sessions with the Amazon engineers? Yeah, I'll say that's one of the session I'd recommend is Dave Janacek's session. Talks about how they monitor services within AWS. It's a super interesting talk, whether you're doing serverless or whatever. It doesn't talk about tools. It talks about techniques and patterns and ways to do it. It's really interesting. Also looks like David did his diagrams in MS Paint. So it's high quality production work. No, but it's super relatable. You don't need to be a principal engineer to understand it. If you're new into software, it's a really good primer on how you monitor systems at scale and implementing observability, and more about why as well. So David's been an AWS engineer, an Amazon engineer for years. So some of his examples go into Amazon.com retail, and stuff they implemented 10 years ago there, right up to common day. So that's a super interesting one.
He also gave a talk on step functions. There was another talk he gave which was really kind of detailed.
Yeah. He's one of the Lambda. He's the engineers in the Lambda team. So he's a very experienced engineer. He's a senior principal.
Yeah, another session I watched was on EventBridge, again from Stephen, again AWS engineer. I was talking about the multi-account, multi-bus related patterns and how and where you can use. It was kind of too much for someone starting new on EventBridge, but definitely if you have multiple accounts and you have a number of different event buses and how you can kind of bring them together was really interesting to watch.
Alex, you're currently refactoring a distributed monolith into a multi-account EventBridge architecture. Just to check if you watched this, because I think it'll help.
I haven't watched that specific one, no. The one I found really interesting was there was a talk about new features in lake formation, which I think will make our data lake for that same project a lot easier to manage. They've got something coming soon called governed tables, which helps you manage the security of the data a lot easier. But I will definitely give that one a watch, because it does sound like it will help quite a lot. With the new lockdown restrictions, I've decided to work over Christmas, and we're calling it the Christmas Refactor. It's quite a almost book-like name.
You can have a good playlist of content while you do it. And Jeremy Daly's Chrome plugin can help with speeding up the video speed as well. It's a good tip.
Yeah, allow me to get through the backlog. Do any of you have any fun holiday side projects, or after a long year, just taking a break?
Serverless Days is coming back. Serverless Days virtual. That's going to be end of February. There should be an announcement soon. We wanted to make it last week, but we're a little bit behind. Emma, stop laughing at me, because I'm just waiting on me. So yeah, there'll be a CFP. Watch out for that. I think you can still sign up if you register on the current Serverless Days virtual website. You'll sign up to our mailing list, and we'll send out an email when that CFP is open if you want to speak. As Sheen says, we want people to share. It's going to be end of Feb, 4 hours, so it's not an all day in front of the screen. 4 hours, 5 speakers, I think it's going to be. Yeah, so Service Days Virtual going to come back end of Feb. Yeah, we'll all be in front of our screens.
Yeah, very cool. I don't have any side projects because I don't do much hands-on these days, but I'm just halfway through writing a blog post based on serverless and theme around, okay, we've been focusing on cost so far. Where are we heading towards in 2021 when we look at Lambda or serverless? Is it cost or something else? So yeah, along those lines.
I've got a couple of blog articles in progress, which I should definitely wrap up, but I also have a drone and an Alexa, and I'm not able to travel anymore. So I think I'm going to be seeing how Lambda can connect the two things together.
Interesting.
Yeah, Ben always has this problem of too many ideas. He tries to float them around the office. So for quite a while there was the talk of voice ops and wanting to make your Alexa tell you when your deploy failed or passed.
Don't worry, Alex, my drone is going to tell me now, so even more dangerous.
And we will be, while everyone is celebrating the Christmas, and we will be kind of not in that area, and we will be working in deeply what's next for Tundra, and I will be continue to be as busy as today. So like there's no side project going on.
Nice. We'll probably end the panel discussion there then, but does anyone have anything they'd like to mention before we wrap up? I think you've got some new courses on Senzo.
Yeah. So if you go to homeschool.dev, we've got a bunch of new courses. There is Jan Churi, his production of the serverless course starts 18th of Jan. Vlad Ionescu's containers in AWS. So if you want to learn how to use containers, for example, Fargate is going to be covered extensively in that course, serverless containers. And then February, there's testing serverless with Alexander Simovic and Slobodan Stojanovic. And then for instance, I'm launching a Node.js course focused Node.js for serverless. So if you're a developer coming from a non-JavaScript, non-Node background, and you now decided you want to write serverless functions in Node, that's the course for you. It's not going to teach you how to program, it's going to teach you how to use Node.js effectively. It's really kind of focused on real world use cases. So you'll learn things on how to use NPM and how to write tests badly and these kind of things. Yeah, that's it. Cool.
Nice. If there's nothing else then, thanks everyone for joining, and thanks guys for coming along. I think we've recorded this, we'll put this out as a podcast as well if anyone wants to re-listen and go over the talking points that were interesting to them. Just before we do wrap up, where can people find more of everyone's content? So Sheen, I know you have a nice medium that I often read. What's the best place to find content from all of you guys in the future? Maybe Sheen, you can start.
Yeah, so I'm on Twitter, Sheen Brussels, and Medium, S Brussels. So yeah, or just search, you'll be able to find. Reinvent catalog, session catalog, search for Lego, and I think it should appear there.
Nice. I'm at EllerbyBen, so it's ELLERBY on Twitter, and Serverless Transformation is our blog, podcast, and newsletter that Alex helps me run. So you can definitely find some content there.
Yeah, I'll go. At I am Stan on Twitter. It's probably only about 20% serverless content. I get very distracted. Check out homeschool.dev, and we've got a new blog coming up at interrupt.dev. There should be a lot more content. There's a couple posts about previous reInvent announcements there, and there's going to be a few recap ones in the new year. The focus going a lot more in depth rather than having a 200, 300 word blog post. The idea would be have something that can go really in depth into the topic. So if you like spending 30 minutes reading nonsense, interrupt.dev is a good place to go. Otherwise, homeschool.dev.
And you can find me with Emrah Samdan on Twitter. I'm mostly, active and talking about serverless a lot. And you can also read my blogs on the blog.tundra.io. I can only write for my company for now, and you can see, and you can we are generating 2 blocks per week constantly, and you can see what's going on there.
Nice. Well, I hope you all have a good holiday, and thanks everyone for tuning in. We'll see everyone in the new year.
Thanks so much for hosting, Alex.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.